In 1900, France stood at the pinnacle of global power. The economy was surging, colonial wealth was flowing into Paris, and the Third Republic appeared more stable than any government in the nation's revolutionary history. Looking at these crowds, the progress of the Belle Epoque seemed permanent. But within 40 years, that image of invincibility was gone. Through 2 world wars, the nation would lose over 1 million men in the trenches, suffer 2 separate invasions, and watch its capital fall to a foreign army. The territorial collapse was equally absolute. Within a single lifetime, France would lose more than 90% of its global empire, shrinking from a worldwide titan back to its European borders. By any traditional historical metric, these compound catastrophes should have reduced France to a minor power, a state hollowed out by debt, severe demographic loss, and military humiliation. Instead, France exited the 20th century as a nuclear-armed state with a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. It had traded the administrative burden of a global empire for the concentrated leverage of a modern heavyweight. This wasn't a matter of luck. France survived by systematically unlearning its oldest ideas about strength and redefining what it meant to be a global superpower. For centuries, French military might relied on massive formations of marching infantry. But as the First World War opened, that traditional strength became a liability. Soldiers were funneled into muddy, static trenches, facing industrial weapons that could cut down thousands in a matter of minutes. The human cost of these outdated tactics was immense. At the Battle of the Marne, a desperate defense managed to stop the German advance, but at the price of nearly 330,000 French casualties in a single month of fighting. As the lines froze, technology turned toward the horrific to break the deadlock. Dense yellow-green clouds of chlorine gas began drifting over the battlefields, causing victims to effectively drown on dry land as liquid filled their lungs. France attempted to learn from this trauma by building the Maginot Line, the ultimate static defense. This state-of-the-art network of concrete and steel was designed to make the French border impenetrable, locking the nation's security behind fixed fortifications. But in 1940, the investment proved worthless. German mechanized units simply bypassed the line, driving through the Ardennes and the Low Countries to outflank the entire French army in just 6 weeks. The resulting collapse led to the nation's lowest point in modern history: a split country, a German-occupied Paris, and the collaborationist Vichy government led by Philippe Pétain. Relying on 19th century concepts of power, massive standing armies and immovable forts had brought the French state to the edge of total dissolution. Survival required a new definition of the state. From exile in London, Charles de Gaulle established Free France, asserting the nation existed through its will to resist, rather than control of physical territory. On the ground, leaders like Jean Moulin worked to unify scattered resistance cells. This meant replacing traditional battle lines with asymmetrical warfare, using sabotage and intelligence to undermine the occupation from within. Following liberation, a battered and indebted France wrongly assumed that reclaiming its overseas colonies was the only way to restore its status as a great power. This led to a series of colonial disasters. In Indochina, the French military was forced into a humiliating withdrawal after the Battle of Dien Bien Phu in 1954, signaling that the era of European imperialism was over. The unraveling continued through the Suez Crisis and the brutal war in Algeria. Maintaining forced colonial control required a level of military and moral friction that the post-war French state could no longer sustain. The loss of the empire was a violent, necessary amputation. It forced France to abandon the 19th century map and seek security through modern economic and technological influence. France pivoted toward military self-reliance. To ensure its sovereignty would never depend on allies, it developed a nuclear deterrent, testing its first atomic bomb in the Sahara in 1960. This military pivot was paired with a structural one. France positioned itself as the architect of European integration, turning former rivals into partners. By binding the economies of Western Europe together, Paris created a bloc that provided more diplomatic leverage than a dozen colonies. Economic cooperation became the new mechanism for regional stability and French influence. This shift was codified with the euro. Replacing the franc with a shared currency tied France's economy to the continent, creating a unified market to rival the US and China. This economic weight preserved the nation's global relevance. Economic integration and nuclear deterrence replaced vast territory and standing armies as mechanisms of French influence. This modern model brings friction. Today, France faces slow growth, mounting debt, and intense domestic resistance whenever the government attempts to reform social protections. Despite this, French leadership pushes for an assertive, strategically independent European Union, one capable of acting on the world stage without depending on outside powers. Though its colonial empire is gone, France maintains its presence abroad through targeted operations in the Sahel, using modern professional forces rather than massed conscripts. The modern French state is difficult to govern, and its citizens are quick to protest, but it has proven to be remarkably resilient. By repeatedly shedding its outdated imperial shell and reinventing the sources of its power, France demonstrated that while a nation may bend under the immense pressure of history, it is incredibly hard to break.